The .NET Core podcast is supported by our listeners who have become patrons. To see a full list of the patrons, or to join them, head over to .NETCore.show/patrons. Hello everyone and welcome to the .NET Core podcast, an award-winning podcast where we reach into the core of the .NET technology stack and, with the help of the community, present you with the information that you need in order to grok the many moving parts of one of the biggest cross-platform multi-application frameworks on the planet. I am your host, Jamie GaProgMan Taylor. In this episode, I talked with Simon Jackson about mixed reality, the Metaverse, and what they actually mean for software developers and designers. We also discussed some of the most interesting uses of mixed reality from the last few years. Along the way, we have a discussion on accessibility and what developers and designers should be thinking about when building their applications and experiences. So let's sit back, open up a terminal, type in .NET New Podcast, and let the show begin. So Simon, thank you ever so much for spending some time with me today, with the listeners today. I genuinely appreciate it when people take time out of their day, and you're joining me before your workday starts. So hopefully we won't tire you out too much. But thank you very much.
It's always good fun on a Monday. Monday's the long day.
Early morning Monday recording. Oh, that rhymes. That should be a song.
It's the title of the podcast.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So would you mind please perhaps introducing yourself to the listeners so they know a little bit about you, like the kind of work you do, that kind of stuff? Is that all right?
Yeah. Okay. So I'm Simon Darkside Jackson, named from an 80s retro game, which was the sequel to Driller. So that just gives an indication of just how old I am these days. Yes. I've been a long-time game developer and mixed reality developer now, working in all things here, there, and everywhere. Always a very big, keen educator. So I've always had a passion for basically building things, taking things complicated, breaking them down, just so then to show people how to do them and work out step by step and fill in the gaps where documentation always falls short. I've worked in many industries, from healthcare to construction to just about everything, really, except for finance. I saved myself from working in finance because I like my sanity too much. I say that I work in medical, and sometimes some clinical staff have very unique perspectives on how things should be done, but which does test your sanity a bit. But hey ho, it is who it is. I am a Microsoft Global MVP for mixed reality. I am a Microsoft Game Dev Ambassador, which was formerly the Idea Xbox MVP, which was formerly an Xbox MVP. And I'm also now a Xbox Community Champion, which was what was formerly called the Xbox MVP group, until that met its demise. Everything seems to... This is it. 2020 is the year of shrinkage. So I still have my 3 awards for the moment. It's up to renewal season, so those MVPs always have the imposter syndrome of, have I done enough? Am I doing enough? Am I getting out there? Granted, a lot of my MVP work tends to be behind the shadows, and I can never talk, so I have to put people in touch with people who know people who can talk to people who can say, yes, he's done things. Working a lot of games, especially with working with the Idea Xbox group and the game dev community, you end up working with studios behind the scenes, getting people started, getting them ahead in the program and things like that, or you work with unannounced titles to help them through the whole application process, which looks similar, but everyone always... Again, I think everyone in the game dev community suffers from imposter syndrome, because it's like, oh, well, I'm only doing this much. Okay, but what's your dreams? Where are you going with this? Put that down then, and such. I suppose in the sort of monetary world, almost a husband, father of 4. My eldest has special needs, which is always an interesting challenge. But it also brings with, especially to sort of the Xbox and the gaming groups, it's a keen view on accessibility. and things that people need to do to ensure that they have the widest reach possible of who they want to market their game with. And that's not to say you have to do everything for every game. Where it makes sense, where you feel you want to attract that audience, where you want to be more inclusive, that's where those kind of things come in. So again, it's all in the education thing. I'll go, look at this resource, or do this, and it's good fun. I don't get out as much as much these days, especially since 2019. But I'm an avid speaker. I'm always out doing events, whether it's promoting books that I've written. Got several Unity books. Might be working on some more. I must be insane. I keep doing them 2 at a time. And after I did 2 at the same time last time, I said never again. And yeah, I don't know why we do this to ourselves. It's never fun.
Keeps us out of trouble. That's what it is.
Gets me into trouble. But yeah, that's me in a nutshell. I'm basically out there helping out everyone I can, working with as many game ninjas as possible. I always try to pick up a new one every year. Saying that I've tried to pick up Unreal the last 4 years running, and there's always something. So I think I started playing with Godot this year instead until they're still working on some C# support for some mobile platform. I think, well, that's my primary development, so I can't. I can learn enough, but okay. But yeah, Unreal, Monogame, XNA, C++, the list goes on. With anything to anything for anything.
Nice. I was going to say, I mean, obviously you've said it already, but I feel like having a child with alternate needs, I'm not sure whether that's the correct term to use, but I'm going to use that term.
It changes every year.
Of course, right? I tell people that I'm using words with unintentional ignorance, right? I'm not trying to be horrible, but I don't know the right words. But yes, having your eldest with those alternate needs, special needs, however we want to say it, whatever the correct term is, I feel like that does indeed set you up with a fantastic viewpoint of the accessibility concerns that people have and that we can bring into our applications, right? I'm not going to make this into a conversation about accessibility in apps, but I feel like it should be something that it's on the top of mind for all developers, regardless of where you are in the stack, regardless of where you are in your career. You should be thinking about accessibility to the point where web apps, the accessibility stuff inside of your HTML web apps, in some countries, that's a legal requirement now, right? That you have to include. And it's only just using ARIA tags and then semantic tags inside of your UI so that then screen readers can understand what your app is doing and where things are instead of div, React. But I guess that the whole thing that I'm getting towards here is I guess that you are in a unique position, I suppose, of being able to actually, you sit there and use a piece of software with your eldest child and go, actually, this is hot garbage because we can't do anything together, right? Or actually, this is brilliant because the designers and the developers have actually thought about what about someone who has these particular needs, right?
I mean, it's certainly a lot in all the Xbox groups, whether it's game dev or whether it's the experience group of doing things. You've probably seen from a lot of the literature that accessibility is high on the agenda, and that's not just accessibility; it's accessibility, inclusivity, and safety. Ironically, one of the biggest challenges I have for my eldest, because he has no stranger danger, is safety. He will sign up to anything, which is a pain. But also, when it comes to gaming and things like that, it's to ensure the fact that he's meeting safe people, or at least in an environment which can be considered safe or safer, because it's just the internet at the end of the day. But a lot of the accessibility groups, whether they're working on sighted resources, whether they're working on audio resources, whether they're working on physical limitations or abilities of players, it is a huge focus, and we're constantly pummeled with these things. In fact, there is even, I'll give you a link to this later, there's the Xbox ambassadors place where you can actually sign up and basically become an ambassador, but what you get out of it, there's little missions and things to do, and a lot of those, there's a whole new accessibility arm to that. And there's tons of resources, and that's both from the view of the players, how would I play this thing, but also what I really like of late is that they're also having the developer focus, so showing you the information we give to developers to say, watch this video, here's this certification requirement you need to be able to do to pass this bar, and what you need to do it. And a lot of those things, whether it's as simple as remapping controls is an accessibility feature because some people are more strong, either the lefties or the righties, or they're just strange, or they have less ability in one hand or the other, or they might only have one hand. And ironically, this even comes up in the mixed reality resources, because if you look at the HoloLens 2 and all of the hands tracking, everyone's using two hands. And they're like, oh, look, I can pick this up, I can move it, and yay. Okay, what if the person's only got one hand? What if the person has no hands and they still want to interact with your environment? And it's challenging people with these kind of questions of, fine, that's you as an able person are doing that, but what if? And the last thing you want to do is to cut off potentially a huge part of your thing, or in some of the enterprise terms, actually lose a bid because you don't have access to a certain portion of that company's employment force who need to do things. Construction's the most brilliant one, is because case of 9 times out of 10, the person who's using the headset won't have their hands to do with, because they're doing things with those hands, like holding up a beam or hammering something in, but they still need to inform or interact with. So in some ways, accessibility also goes beyond just a person's limitations. There might be limitations in what they're doing, and those same things apply in just a slightly different cadence.
Yeah, there's a wonderful infographic, and this is more for the listeners, obviously, because you'll know about this, by Microsoft, that shows the different types of accessibility. With perhaps you have accessibility concerns with your sight, with your arms, with your ears, with your touch, taste, smell, that kind of thing, and how they can be permanent because of some kind of maybe a disability or an accident, or they could be temporary. And one of my favorite ones is like someone holding a baby has one hand, right? Because they're holding a baby, right? So your app needs to be able to, or maybe does your app, you need to be able to ask these questions. Does your app need to be able to cater to the people who are temporarily using one hand, or perhaps they can't hear properly because maybe they were born deaf, or maybe they have auditory processing problems, or indeed, what if they are using your app in a loud, noisy environment like a construction site, right? And these concerns need to be talked about, at the very least need to be talked about. And if it is decided that you are a book selling shop and you have a book selling PWA that's downloadable to your phone, and that people who have have the ability to use one arm either temporarily or permanently, or who are using your app in a loud, noisy environment, aren't really your core customer base, then as long as you can say, hey, we're okay with this, then at least you've had that decision. They've had that discussion. You've had that design moment where you've thought, well, hang on, what if there is someone who is only one-handed or hasn't, who is using a screen reader? Do we need to cater to the people who are using screen readers? And people listening might be thinking, well, we're talking to Simon and we're talking about VR, mixed reality and video gamey things so far. Why would I need to cater to a blind user? Well, guess what? I remember about 10 years ago, there was someone who posted a long play video on Reddit, and they were a fully registered blind person, and they sat through and played the entirety of Legend of Zelda Ocarina of Time on the Nintendo 64. So even blind people can use your apps, right?
I have several good friends who have sight impairments. Sightless Combat, you'll find him on all the places. He is fully blind. He should see his room when he's on a stream. This wall is littered with just memorabilia and things he's got. But he plays like Gears of War, The Last of Us. Sometimes he needs an assisted person with him just to help him move around it, but he's controlling the game, or he's doing the firing, using some of the features that they enable in these games for people with those kind of accessibility needs. Granted, some of them do get abused. Aim assist is the biggest one, because the amount of people who do not need aim assist turn it on for that competitive advantage. No. You play. Those tools are there for people who need them, not to be abused, but they do. But it's interesting you mentioned about apps. I know of one Microsoft engineer, I believe he still works there, who actually built an AR. He built, and okay, this is a person with lived. In fact, he was completely blind and he's partially deaf, and he built an AR app to help with navigation around the Microsoft campus. And at campus, I don't know if you saw this one, but he has headphones in, which have 3D spatial audio. His phone, his geolocation aware. He uses the camera, it has his vision, so he can hold it up and it'll tell him what it sees there. And he says, right, well, need to get to Microsoft campus, room 3, and he will navigate him across roads, avoiding traffic. And these are the kind of things which potentially limiting scope of use because you're a very focused target audience, but those same capabilities are available to anyone who doesn't have those impairments, because you still need to be able to, I have no idea where I am on Redfern campus, I need to get to that room and go across. And having the same features, but having 3D binaural audio and other things means that he, as a non-sighted person without a stick, without a dog, granted he still has a dog, he's lovely, can get around. And as a partially non-sighted person, he wrote that app, including all the solutions and things to be able to train it to know what to do, and it's fantastic. And whether it's games, whether it's enterprise, whether it's just a bit of fun, these are considerations to keep in mind of who your target audience is and what you can do to help them. Well, I say that having an age check verification, which is please enter your birth date, is not an age verification template. I think we can just all agree on that. That is not true.
Yep, I agree.
Do not base your child's safety based on a date that someone can type in.
Yes. Or select from a drop down or something.
Drop down, yeah.
If you're able to do basic maths and you desperately want to access that content, you'll do the basic maths to access that content, right?
Yeah, I'll just put you. I was born in the year 1990. There, that was
absolutely. Oh my goodness! You've just now reminded me of a wonderful lyric from a song by Jonathan Colton, where he sings, "I can't believe you could be. I still can't believe you could be born in the 90s." But there you go. But no, right. Yes, so we chatted a little bit about accessibility there, which I think is a very important thing. I'm very, whilst I'm not the greatest advocate of accessibility, I feel like when I come into a team or when I'm working alongside a team and I say, hey, have you thought about blind users, deaf users, users with color blindness? Because there are lots of different variants of color blindness. It's fantastic to be able to use all the different colors in your app. But what if you are red-green colorblind? I'm not sure if that's a combination you get, but let's say red-green colorblind is a combination you get, right? What if you use red-green colorblind and your OK button is green and your cancel button is red, and they both look monochrome to the person who's using the app, right? Well, what then, right?
Yeah, you get those same things everywhere. And there are tons of resources out there to help you. To even, I mean, some of the best ones are a case of they turn your browser into and they have a scale of showing you what those things like, showing you what dyslexia is like. That is freaky. I use respect for people with dyslexia and how they manage to find ways to cope, because it's scary. Same with color blindness, where you need to work with high contrasts. I actually do a lot with image tracking at the moment, and high contrast is a big thing when you want to be able to identify things you want to track. Right. And there's tools out there that will help you to also experience or see your app or game with these kind of filters on to give you some level of appreciation. I mean, it's never a true appreciation because you don't live with that condition. You can always turn it off where you can't. But yeah, there are fantastic amount of tools and resources out there to help people both build for this, but also test it personally themselves. But again, nothing really changes the fact that the best way to test is to give it to someone with those needs. Like Sightless, he's a site consultant for most games and studios. He worked with the Gears of War team to build in their accessibility when they're doing all the testing. Same with people with auditory issues, sight issue, partial impairments. There are people out there, fantastic consultants, and they're all really nice people. Which is, considering some of the feedback they get, they're still really nice people.
Oh, absolutely. As someone who has been out of my life for a long time, I shall say, was born deaf and had a cochlear implant. And she showed me a website that attempted to give an approximation of what a cochlear implant was like. And until that point, I assumed that a cochlear implant would give you, 90% hearing or something like that. And even then, it's the way that I describe it to people is it's like a really badly tuned AM radio, but with loads more static over the top of it. And like just the amount of concentration that is required for people with any kind of assistive technology around their eyes and ears, their sight and hearing, is just the amount of concentration it takes to be able to just navigate the world. Two of my little ones are dyslexic, and until we had their consultations and stuff, I didn't realize that a dyslexic person has to work twice as hard as everyone else just to be able to read things. And if listeners, I challenge you, look around the room you're in or the space you're in and count how many things have letters and numbers on them. Now imagine that in order to read one of those, you have to work twice as hard because perhaps the letters, you are perceiving the letters as moving ever so slightly or exploding into fragments in and out or going in and out of focus, just because your brain is wired in such a way that you can't perceive those letters and those markings and scratchings and things correctly. So what I'll say as we close off this bit, please, developers, designers, everybody, spend a little bit of time considering other people and the people who will use your applications. And if you want some real numbers, go back a bunch of episodes. I did an episode on empathy, sympathy, and compassion where I actually laid out how many people are actually registered blind in the UK and the US and how much of a percentage of the population that is, just to give you real numbers so you can turn to your boss and go, actually, we need to have a chat about this.
Actually, one of my proudest engagements I had with Microsoft was actually one called Project Physio, and slightly different. It was from the same kind of angle, but it was for helping children with cystic fibrosis, hugely debilitating disease, and it is, but it can be managed with treatment. But trying to get kids to do a long, grueling procedure repeatedly every single day is hard. So Project Physio was a work with Great Ormond Street and with Microsoft to build games to gamify the actual treatment, which was fantastic. And we had some awesome results coming out of that, where we basically built games, and basically the actual act of doing the procedure were the input controls for actually controlling the game, whether it was blowing balloons or firing darts across the room. And the actual engagement itself was just fantastic of that. And that was one of my sort of proudest things to be involved with, and building toolkits and frameworks to enable developers to then go and build things for these things. Even more challenging. So you have the one-touch challenge and things like that. But from a design perspective, you had two inputs. One was a breath, which had to follow a certain rhythm, and another was one button. Now, build a game, they controlled it and do lots of fantastical things with just those two inputs. To add a bit of extra consideration, the breathing had to be rhythmic. It had to follow a certain pattern. So it's a case of blow hard, stop, blow hard, stop, but not too hard, not too soft. A lot of little things. It was a nice, interesting challenge to try and get people into it. So yeah, that was one of my biggest projects out there.
Brilliant. And yeah, I think it's an incredibly important thing. And I feel like the VR, XR multiple different ways of alternating reality to bring people in can perhaps really help with that. And so I guess that's how we pivot into our main discussion for the day. So I do have written down in my notes, I don't know if the episode will be titled this, but I've got Unity, Metaverse, VR, .NET, XR, right? Those are the words I've written down, right? Because they're all different things, right? So I guess before we talk about like Unity and all the different tools and XR and VR and all that kind of stuff, I wonder, could you perhaps give the listeners a bit of a description of what each of those things are? So the Metaverse, XR, VR, AR, all those kinds of things, right? Because it's just alphabet soup, right?
Yes, I'll leave the fun one to the end because that's not an interesting one. But when we're talking about mixed reality, we're talking about two elements realistically of you have virtuality, which is where your vision is completely occluded. You're in a dark room and all the 3D content being presented to you is just what is generated. It's the only thing you can see. You have the augmented view, where basically you're non-occluded. You can see the real world, and 3D content usually either is presented in it, which is what you see with mobile AR experiences, or they're actually interacting with world elements, which is where you get more like you have the headsets like the HoloLens or the Magic Leap, things like which understand the world and can actually interact with it. These are not two discrete things because it is a whole spectrum. Because content or representation can be in the virtual, it can be have some of the real world in it and have 3D content in it. It can be fully 3D in the real world, and they can have the true. This is your world being absolutely enhanced. So doors being recognized, interacting with elements. The best thing I've seen for this is a game called Tahoma. Available in most of the stores, where there was someone who was actually deaf but has these attachments. We can put attachments, and then the world becomes augmented, where they interact with doors through the visual way of just like open door, things like that. They can replay conversations of people who have been in that space as if they were there at the time. Obviously, can't talk to them because it's the past. I'm not got a time machine yet. So that's the whole augmented virtual world, as it were, where it then gets into the soup. So there's this lovely term called the Metaverse, and it's a really bad overused term. Neil Stevenson coined it back in Snow Crash ironically, as a virtual world multiple people can join in, but in the modern world, it's become the case of like the web, the next generation web, as it were, which is hilarious because it's nothing new, as it really put it another way. It also gets mixed up because then people call it Web 3.0, which is another very broken term, because they get mixed up with crypto and things like that, and it's none of that realistically. Where it fundamentally comes from is that the current modern day web was built for static web pages, videos and images, and some text. But that is ultimately just what your web browser sees and how it interprets. And your web browser is just an app like everything else. There's a whole argument about, I want it on the web. Okay, but it's not a native app. It's just in a web browser, which is a native app, which is always a fun discussion to have. But your modern web browser has decades of old technical debt of things that are in there, trying to work with stuff that's like from way back in the 60s and 70s, of when we had the first iterations of how the web came to be. And all of that code still exists in modern day web browser, and it has to sort of pre-filter through. So websites from 20 or 30 years ago still will work in your modern browsers thanks to all the backdated things, but it's a whole huge amount of technical debt. So when people then start to talk about Web 3.0 or the Metaverse, what they're talking about is sort of the next generation of browser and what that can mean. And the way I converse it when it comes to these kind of subjects is that the Metaverse ultimately is the world on data. So beyond the web browser, which is like shows you just a view in the world, is the fact that you can take that world with you, whether it's augmented, whether it's virtual. It is both, not one or the other. Some will say it's only augmented, so you have to be there, and some will say it's only virtual, so I can do it whatever. It's a mix, and ultimately it comes down to you now have, instead of just this digital web page presentation, you've now got the real world representation augmented with digital information about that site. Whether I'm looking at a statue, and then I can see all the history of that statue, who created it, and it's linking all these separate information together. Some of it might be visual, some of it might be text, but it's still the metaverse. The metaverse is not VR and it's not AR. It's somewhere in between the real world intermixed with data. Now, when it gets more interesting, where some of the standard groups we work with, there's also this thing called the hyperverse. We're going to verse all the things. I want to watch an episode of Firefly where we have the verse, and that's ultimately all these verses. We're all verses now. The hyperverse, where realistically what you're doing is that you're taking all this content around the world, and it's a case of fine, that's this world. Well, this is a digital age, so the fact that I can actually have multiple of these verses, the multiverse or the hyper, there's too many terms, right? It gets really bad. But ultimately, you have to break the confines, because when you're talking about a digital universe, whether it's based upon the Earth, each place or location can have several different layers of information based upon it. So I might go to, say, Times Square in New York, and I can see all the advertisements and all augmentified, so I can see what I'm going to do. You might now have a travel digital verse on top of metaverse on top of this, so I can see all the travel information about navigation, where to go to, how to get places. On top of that, then I'm going to have the entertainment verse, where I'm actually now seeing like actual concerts on Times Square. I think Storm's in some other ones have all done some recently, where they take over that square and basically somebody comes, right, you're in a concert venue. Same physical place, multiple different digital layers applying to that. But also the same case for those people who are not there. So am I still in that digital representation if I'm actually in the UK watching a video concert in New York, being as either a digital avatar or just being like a camera in the scene? So when we talk about the metaverse, realistically, it's just a new age way of digital representation of all the information we have in the world, interconnected in different ways. And the key thing is not crypto and how I buy things and what's all the how do I add value to something. It's about the interconnective of information around subject matters, whether it's a physical element, whether it's a person, whether it's an actual digital piece of information together, trying to homogenize all that information together. And this is where, when people talk Web 3.0, is the fact that it's a case of the modern day web browser is not suited for handling that. Yes, we got APIs, yes, we can get calls and things there, but the whole metaverse concept is beyond that. It's like the next level of interconnected data. And ultimately, the old web browser needs to die, and there needs to be something in its place. Unfortunately, you've got Meta Horizons trying to build this virtual world. Great, fine, but that's a VR-only concept, and there's no data in there. It's just, you go to a digital virtual representation world. You know, the likes of Niantic, who are trying to build AR billboards and information in space, so you have to go to the space to see these things, and the two factions like warring off. But we are seeing now a merging of things when things like in digital museums. So a lot of the big museums in America sort of have keyed onto this. There's a few others in other places. I'm working on another where you have a real life world experience. It's augmented in some fashion. So applying the whole metaverse concept. So I'm not just going to a museum to see this thing on a shelf and there's a little poster next to it. I can look at that. I can get information about it. I can actually have the creator of that thing walk up to me and have a conversation and telling me about this thing. If I've got friends there, we can then network, relate, but also then allowing that I can take that with me because it's on my phone. Now I can go where I've paid to see this experience. I've got my phone. I can show other people. People who are not in the museum can still come and visit. They might not get the full in-person experience because you still want people to come through the door. You don't just want this digital revenue. But adding to that as well. And you're making it almost a network solution. So whether you're in person, whether you're remote, you're all still people going to and experiencing this content and be able to take it away and then be able to share it with friends, and then friends can share it in another vein to their fashion. I just need to stop the conversation every time. Say, well, can we put it in the web? It's not. I know it's an app you have to install on your phone. You have to install Chrome. Granted, it might come pre-install. You have to install Chrome on your phone. It's just an app. Old app versus new app. But there are standards forums and things which are trying to make things more universal. So you can have a potential next generation universal browser. But most of the current browser developers of Mozilla stopped work on extending Firefox to make VR, and then now got the Firefox VR thing, which is still sort of in brief standards mode, which will be separate, and people get confused about switching one to the other. It just doesn't help so much when people keep kind of shoehorn VR or XR into a current browser tech, because you're making so many trade-offs to make it work. It sort of dilutes the experience, and it still frustrates me today. We have a standard called WebXR, and the XR part of it is I can show a camera. There's no world understanding. There's no case. If you can build an app in Unity or Unreal, and you can use like AR Core or AR Kit on Apple, AR Core and Android, AR Kit on Apple, and you can then see. It can see the world. It can then map it out, and you can put content on it. You can have balls rolling off your table. I've got 1,001 balls rolling off the table demos. You've seen all the lovely AI game generation things. Oh, place this here, place this, place. Oh, most of it's fake, but same concept. Well, look, and drop things and it falls off my table because of something else. But there are draft specifications for doing these things, but it's not yet. But again, it still comes back to we're trying to shoehorn things into an old browser that wasn't built to do this, putting more and more weight onto it. It needs to clean break at some point. But change is hard. Hopefully, I rambled on forever on that one. It's, as you can see, it's a very muddy concept, and I've been on presentations or talks going about it, and in between the people who do these things and working, there's still a lot of dissension, especially those who like crypto. Building artificial scarcity on something which is not scarce.
If you're enjoying this show, would you mind sharing it with a friend or colleague? Check out Podcatcher for a link to the show notes, which has an embedded player within it and a transcription and all that stuff, and share that link with them. I'd really appreciate it if you could indeed share the show. But if you'd like a few other ways to support it, you could leave a rating or review on your podcatcher of choice. So if you head over to .netcore.show/review, you'll find loads of ways to do that. You could consider buying the show a coffee. The Buy Me a Coffee link is available on each show's show notes page on the website. This is a one-off financial support option. You could become a patron. This is a monthly subscription-based financial support option, and the link to that is included on each episode show notes page as well. I'd love it if you could share the show with a friend or colleague, or leave a rating or review. The other options are completely up to you, and are not required at all to continue enjoying the show. Anyway, let's get back to it. I can imagine it's a bit like that XKCD cartoon of there are 9 competing standards. Let's make a standard to unify them all. There are now 11 competing standards.
Yes.
Okay. So, yeah, I like the idea that there's going to be hopefully a clean break, that there is a separate web browser for or app, unifying app for all of these mixed reality things, because trying to shoehorn it all into one app is just going to make, like, your web browser will slowly become a 1 gigabyte binary file with all of its dependencies, right? And that's no good. We all know that who was it? It was Abraham Maslow who said, when all you have is a hammer, everything's a nail, right? And if you're trying to shoehorn everything into the web browser, then, then the web browser becomes that hammer, and really, you don't want your app experience to be shoehorned into. If you want, like you said, if you want your experience to be all encompassing and fantastic and to be the one thing that drives people to your product, then you need to be using something that is different to what we were all using for what is essentially forms over data, right? Our standard web browsing experience is load a form. It doesn't look like a form because it's been styled to not look like a form, but load a form, show me some data. I push the button, it sends the data back, and then I push another button, it brings me some more data, right? You don't want that. That's not going to be fun for, like you said, for the people who are going to museums and stuff. Oh, wow, I can scan the QR code and it takes me to a website that tells me the information that's in front of me. That's not engaging. That's not mixed reality or anything like that. So I fully appreciate where you're coming from.
Yeah, I mean, ultimately, it's a case of there is never going to be one metaverse. As much as the ideal is there, we don't live in a digital economy world where that's scalable, because every business wants their way to make money. And granted, yes, they should still be able to make money. Where the standards really need to come in is the case of, I should be able to go from Horizon World to Mozilla Hubs seamlessly. Click of a button, I just transfer my singular digital identity, who is me. There's only one of me. That's it. Well, as far as I'm aware, my virtual evil clone has not invaded the place yet. A single platform for having digital identity, which is decentralized. So that you see this word decentralized a lot, where no one company owns you or your data. So the whole decentralized part is because of there is just me. Granted, there are bad decentralization. So Mastodon, which was seen as the Hail Mary to Twitter, when Twitter guys, everyone go to Mastodon. And then you find that, well, one server is able to then disable your account and you can never sign up to any other servers. And it's like, that's not decentralized then. So you have a decentralized part of your identity, and then you as an individual, whether it's your digital representation or it's still you. I mean, I could have many digital representations. There's still only one physical me. And that identity should be able to take what I own, where I own it, from place to place. And that the one misnomer I will break down is that just because I buy a hat in Fortnite does not mean I have to be able to wear that hat in any other app. That's down to the developers who build those things. So yes, I own the hat, but it's only in there. If they build something which then can be shared, yes, and another platform supports whatever that content is, I can taste it. Yes, I can take places. Doesn't change the fact that I own it. I own it in Fortnite. Great. Does not mean I have to. It's every other app. It's not the metaverse if every other app can't have that hat as well. So, that's a little bit much. But ultimately, because of my digital identity, be able to seamlessly travel from these different representations, whether that's I could be in an augmented fashion, open up a portal, put on a headset, and then I'm in Fortnite in that location. There's a load of location-based things out there now. Still RIP the Void, but there's the Void. They had Secrets of the Empire. They had a big contract with Disney until everything went away, where they actually had, it was amazing. They had true virtual 4D presence. So you put on these headsets, you're in a physical space. All the virtual content was lined up with the real world. So you walk up, you push a wall, there's a digital wall in the headset, there's a physical wall where you can press buttons. They had heat sources where you were walking past a fire. They had mist where you were going through water. If there were other players, you could reach out and actually touch them because everything was tracked, and it was amazing. There are new ones that have spun up in its place, and those are equally fascinating. And they always try to keep up with them. All the headsets keep changing, all the capabilities keep changing. My favorite big thing, which is still hard to get right, is hand tracking. Simply be able to put a headset on, and there's my hands. Yes, you don't have buttons, so that's a hard part for game developers because we like buttons. We like to be able to press and do things. If I've got just my hands, it's a bit harder, but you can work around that. There's always ways to do. But having all these different technologies available, so I should be able to go from experience to experience to experience. Doesn't matter whose app it is. Yes, I might need to download. At the end of the day, you're always going to have to download content. If you're on a web browser, you're still downloading content. It might download to their server, but you're still downloading it. Someone's bandwidth is being used. So but you get more performance when it's on your device. At the end of the day, if it's on a web browser on a big server, you're still beholden to that web server or whatever it is having enough power to run all the things you're going to do. And if they have a big peak, it's going to slow down. Can't slow down in your device unless you're also running many different background apps. So the content always needs to get to your device. So I should be able to say, right, well, I'm going to go Horizon to now, and then I'm going to put my phone down. I'm going to seamlessly walk over to this in-link experience, which has links to Fortnite and things like that, and I can see all these things. Then can stand back and I've gone into a mall, and there's this lovely augmented booth where I can have a talk with someone. Granted, almost leading to the world of AI and how all those things are working. That's just it's it's fun. How all these new AI modalities will impact on the virtual world, we're not to see. Sadly, I think we're seeing people are going, oh, we were all about VR, now we're going to step back. No, we're all about AI, and it's a case of there's not a case of add another technology to the stack. It's almost a transition because it's going out of favor. But all of these things are just more technology for the stack, and it's a case of all those then build up to build the ultimate solution of then how you handle someone in a physical space, how you then provide the digital representation, either augmented or occluded on that content, how you then bring all the information around that and then network with other people around you. But ultimately then saying, right, well, I've done this here. It's like an arcade. I played in one arcade machine. I want to play in another arcade machine, but I still want to be me, not Guy and Rambo. Well, everyone's gone back. Rambo arcade games.
So we've talked a little bit there about the theory of how it all sort of fits together. What about some of the technologies then? Because I remember I first started my communications with you relating to Unity. And I know that Unity has a lot of support for headsets and tracking and all that kind of stuff. And I know that Unity does a little bit of stuff, like they have like a C-sharp-like language that you can use to do stuff. But is that the only way you can do it? As if I'm a .NET dev, right, and I want to do something really cool, and I've been told by the boss, Metaverse, mixed reality, make it work, put it in a browser, right? I then tell the boss, can't put it in a browser, spend $1,000 to get a headset so that I can actually build it. What am I building it with?
Yeah, well, there's many different things out there, and a lot of things are increasingly adding either VR or AR support. Again, yes, down to the language will probably guide your choice more than others, whether it's a case of you use what you know or you learn something new. So Unity is a fully C# platform. They supported JavaScript many moons ago. They realized, and dropped it. They also dropped a language called Boo. Ironically, Boo is still in the background. You see Boo all over Unity in the background if you look for it. But no, Boo is gone as well, so you can't scare people with Unity. Sorry. I'm a father. I will get dad puns in there wherever I can.
Nice.
So if you're doing purely C#, Unity is a good one because it's got a big inline editor and you can do all these fantastic things with it. You've then got, you also have visual scripting in there, but I must admit, as a C# coder, I still find visual scripting alien to me. Node connecting code to get logic, although I know the kids do all the Scratch and all the building block things now. That's how they're learned. I know my youngest is in high school and he's doing all these different things. They're looking and going, oh, that's nice. Then you got the likes of Unreal, which is a bit more a wieldy beast. That you can either do in what they call Blueprint, which is their visual scripting solution, which is quite powerful actually, or you can go back to C++. Although I have done C++ in the past, I've put it in that shoebox in the cupboard marked "Do not open ever again" if I can help it.
There be dragons.
Yes, you got the likes of Godot, which has its own scripting language called GDScript, but it also has C# support, although the C# support is, as they've moved into version 4, it's growing, but it's still behind where their own scripting language is. And you got the likes of Game Maker, have got their own little scripting system. If you want to go pure C#, you got the likes of Monogame, built off the foundations of Microsoft's XNA, which was a fantastic way of going through. It's almost how I got into game development. And then just as it was reaching popularity, it got stopped. But it lived on, and that's all multi-platform, all the different ways of work. And it comes down to what you use will largely depend who you're targeting and what you can do. So it's a mixture of what skills you have, what you're willing to learn, and what you're targeting. So Unity is by far the easiest when it comes to mobile because of its lower footprint. It's not a low footprint, it's a lower footprint. Unreal is the mobile support is less, but you can do things. But the issues require a higher spec device to be able to actually run it. And again, it depends on who your target customers are and what the device is going to have. Godot has only just added VR support, and they're trying to build in AR support. Be interesting. But forgetting all those, you can just go it alone. So there are web-based languages for building VR and AR content in web VR and WebXR, as we discussed earlier. And those do work, and they are fantastic when they work and make sure they're going. Obviously, they require constant connectivity to function. And if you're going to like an exhibit hall or you're going to like South Africa, connectivity is a bit limited. It's amazing how those two things are very similar. Because if you go into a web conference, there's too much Wi-Fi, so you can't get anything. And you go to like South Africa, there is no Wi-Fi, you can't get anything, and there's no way in between. So again, it comes down to also you have to think about where you're going to deploy where this going to run. I mean, I used to say like in the London Underground in case you be stuffed because there's no connectivity, but it's all Wi-Fi down there now. I'm told. Don't know how good it is.
Right.
Wi-Fi is getting everywhere. Elon Musk is deploying Starlink everywhere. We're getting more things everywhere. People will then say, "We need more web." No. What you build, the way you build it would largely depend on all those different factors, like who your customer is, what the platform is, what you're willing to learn, what tools that you need to use, and to build the things. But from a learning perspective, they're all pretty much the same. The hardest part, and generally when I'm either teaching or doing a conference, the hardest part of this new digital age is the fact that humans at a base level don't understand digital representation properly. So we have a lot of things about how we build physical things. When it comes to a digital thing in either in the real world or in the virtual world, there's a lot more to it because you need an emotional context to whatever it is you're building. You need to understand its digital interactions with maybe the physical world or the person and how they're going to interact with it. Because it's not something I can just, there's my mouse, I can pick it up, I can put it down, great. Here's this virtual thing. Well, I take this thing, it's going to envelop my entire arm and make a gun. And it's a case of then that gun then starts talking to me, if anyone's played High on Life. And other such things. And getting everyone's at the same stage of that, of understanding how digital representation works as it pertains to us as humans, because it's not physical. We're used to physical, we're not used to digital. And it's a whole learning process of how you do these things. So whether or not it's a case of I'm throwing a grappling hook to a virtual ladder and then it's pulling me over to it, how are you going to do it in that way that's not going to make the person throw up, is comfortable, works well with the environment that you're in. So do I have 2 meters of space to walk around with, or am I sat on a chair? And all these different things weave together how you build these experiences. And that's always the biggest challenge, but the challenge still comes back to who's your target audience, what they're going to be using it on, how they're going to use it, whether it's head one, whether it's a mobile device, whether it's some awesome augmented canvases, so you're actually projecting digital stuff in 3D. Seeing a lot of these things now in the likes of Times Square. Keep going back to Times Square. People showcasing things there, and they have a digital display of like a spaceman who's actually reaching out to the post, and it's not. It's just a faux way of doing 3D, but it looks that way. And it was interesting the fact that some of the first experienced people saw that they ran. It was like, what's going on here? They didn't understand. Again, this comes down to how you as a human connect to these digital things in the world. And as designers, as developers, we need to be able to understand that to best relate to the actual end user, that they're going to have a good experience. Or, as my favorite thing of, the first thing I showed my kids in VR was a a zombie horror game from my good friends who was just building it for the Windows mixed reality headsets. And the range of experiences from ooh to screaming out loud was hilarious.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, related to that and related to some of the stuff you've said, I know my friend James. He has a VR headset. I'm not sure which one, but he has one of them, and he plays Arizona Sunshine, which is a zombie shooty survival game. And at the end, he says at the end of the game, you got to reach up and grab onto the bottom of this helicopter that's going to lift you out and save you. And he says even now, even though he's put hundreds of hours into this game, every single time he grabs hold of that rung, his body tenses because he's going to be lifted off the floor, but it doesn't happen. He just sort of stands there with his hand in the air, right? And I suppose that's one of the less immersion breaking sort of things that could happen, like you were saying, right? If you want to fire a grappling hook and then get pinged across the room, how do we do that in a safe way, right? And how, like you said, how do we do that so that then the person doesn't feel motion sickness and things like that? So yeah, I think you're right. I think a lot of it has to do with how we design these experiences. Yes, we can do it this way, but do you have a massive space to devote to one person being able to walk around? And how expensive is that? If it's not expensive and you have that space, fantastic, you could do anything.
Actually, one of the interesting things is that there's a recent research study. It's actually a few years old now, but I think it's evolved a bit more since then. And what they did is they intermixed eye tracking, which is becoming more and more popular in some of the head-worn headsets these days. Fair warning to when you're using a headset with eye tracking on it, you will take time to learn it because your eyes will have to start flexing in a way that you didn't expect. It's like a muscle, like anything else. A muscle you start using for the first time is going to hurt. And so a lot of people get put off. It's slow to do things. Eye tracking is great, but what they did was they use eye tracking to monitor how the person's walking. And what's interesting to know is the fact that actually what's going on with your home body is your eye is never just looking forward. Your eye is actually looking everywhere, all at once, and all the place. And they abuse that system because in the intermix between your eye going over here and your eye over to here, they shift it slightly, which causes you, as your body, to actually physically turn. You're not aware of it. As far as you're concerned, you're walking straight. And what they built is a system where you could actually keep walking straight, as far as you were concerned, in a 2 meter by 2 meter space for miles. You were unaware of what this was going on. You were simply walking and walking, and you could just keep going. But if you watch the camera of the person in the room, they're going like this. And they even trialed this with multiple people, so that the system actually helped to avoid two people bumping into each other in the same space. I don't know how many they got up to. It'd be interesting. And I can imagine it took a bit of wear on the eye on things, but it's something you could learn to use. And I suspect it's something we'll see more of in the future as the research and things going on. But it's because of there are things like motion sickness and things like that. There are things we can do digitally to fool the brain to thinking something else. And that's where a lot of the advancements are coming in. So the ways we counteract things like motion sickness is that you either reduce a person's field of view to reduce the amount of input their brain's going so they can handle it, or one of the fantastic ones in the case of snow. If your eye is something else to look at while you're moving, it's distracted. So your brain's not like, oh, I'm moving, my body's not moving. It's like, oh, look at the pretty snow. What's going on? What's going on over there? And you're not particularly aware, but that's what your brain's doing, is going, oh, look at that. That's interesting. Another thing you can do, and it was amazing when I first experienced this. One of the most best ways, and I don't know of anyone who goes motion sick from this. I can run in VR as long as my arms are moving. And if your movement is controlled on your arms, your brain goes, this is perfectly fine. I forget the name now. There's a great climbing game where you have to climb cubes to get things. And yeah, you have to run and then you have to start climbing. And your brain's focused on my hands. What are my hands doing? Here we go, there. And so it's completely, I've forgotten the fact that, you've not thrown up. You actually just run full power across this room, even though you were stood still. Because that's always the first thing to trip the brain up, is that as soon as you see something that your brain goes, hold on, I'm not doing it. It goes, oh, no. some people are better than others, whichever the experience is. But it's knowing those tips and techniques of how you do these things. Again, but not every single tool will work in every single people. So this is why you've seen, especially in VR titles now, you're a range of teleport options, whether it's teleport, which is my preference, which you can't run with, which I have to give up running to be able to teleport. Or they have vignettes, or the gloss over, some even turn it black and white. It's something to basically tell the brain, nothing to see here, it's fine, we're just going to go and do this, and then it's all right, you're back in the room.
Right, I see. Okay, so then what I'll do is I'll have a chat with you outside of the recording to get a bunch of links for interested people to check out. We've got a bunch in the in the document that we filled in together, like Red 6 AR, which allows pilots to learn to fly all of these Top Gun style planes, but without leaving the safety of a safe environment, which is pretty cool.
Red 6 is actually in aircraft. So a pilot one pilot goes up in his aircraft. Right. And that's all he needs then, because everything else is then simulated. So he's actually got the actual plane. He's got all the G-force and everything else. The headset's been tuned to work at these supersonic speeds, which is getting that tracking working when the headset knows it's going this fast and everything else. And it simulates battle environments that give us some dogfights without having to send up another $1 billion plane, which might go wrong and crash and cost things. So the pilots in Red 6, the pilot's actually flying, which is just amazing.
That's mad. Can you imagine the first pilot to be told, we're going to put this headset on you so you don't see the real world? Good luck. Also, you're going at Mach 2.
Yeah. I mean, that is an augmented system, so they can see the real world, but the headset can replace it because it's that bright. It can actually overlay everything. That's no moon.
That's a space station. No, okay, so I'll get some links from you outside of this recording. What's the best way for people to sort of reach out to you? Like, they've listened to this and gone, Simon, that's amazing, I'd like to learn a little bit more. Can you point me in the right direction? How can folks reach out to you? Is it, because we connected over LinkedIn, but is it LinkedIn? Is it Twitter? Is it, you said Mastodon earlier on, which it seems like a bit of a dumpster fire for me, but there you go.
I did not
where people go?
I sat on the fence and said, I'll wait for everyone to move and then I'll go. No, I am basically Simon Darkside J pretty much everywhere. I'm on GitHub, on LinkedIn, on Twitter. I am on Facebook. I don't use Facebook. It's there as a marketing tool. If I've got assets and books and things go on Facebook. There we go. But if you search up Simon Darkside J, you'll find me. If you actually search Simon Jackson, you get the psychologist in America. That's not me. I'm on LinkedIn. I think I'm third ranked for Simon Jackson's on LinkedIn. But there we go.
Oh, cool.
It's interesting. But
excellent. And you said earlier on you've got a number of books out as well, so obviously people can hit up their favorite bookseller and find your books, right?
There's Mastering Unity 2D game development, which I'm currently working on a third edition for to try and modernize it for Unity 2023 and all the modern things. There's a Unity UI book, although I think that's off sale now. But that was great because it was a reference utility for building with the Unity UI system as it was. And I'm also now working on a new book, ironically, on my next least favorite thing, which is automation. So automating building basically, when it comes to Unity, you spend half your life waiting for Unity to load or Unity to build or do things. So why do it yourself? Give it to a computer, let it do all that things, and you can go make more coffee and actually get on with doing life. So automation handles all that. So that one's with Apress, the other one's with Packet. So
cool.
If you want to learn something, write about it.
Excellent. Well, what I'll say, Simon, is thank you ever so much for spending this time with me. I know you've got to, at some point in the next couple of hours, rush off and go to work. So I apologize for using up all of your time this morning.
That's fine.
Thank you very much.
My rushing to work involves rushing to the coffee machine, rushing back to my desk. Done.
There you go. And I assume the coffee will help you rush back anyway. So,
Maybe.
Excellent. Well, like I said, thank you ever so much for being on the show. I really appreciate it. And I learn a whole bunch of stuff, and I'm sure that everyone listening is going to learn a whole bunch of stuff. So thanks for that.
Yep, I was happy to help.
That was my interview with Simon Jackson. Be sure to check out the show notes for a bunch of links to some of the stuff that we covered and a full transcription of the interview. The show notes, as always, can be found at .netcore.show, and there will be a link directly to them in your podcatcher. And don't forget to spread the word. Leave a rating or review on your podcatcher of choice. Head over to .netcore.show/review for ways to do that, or to reach out via our contact page at .netcore.show/contact, and to come back next time for more .net goodness. I'll see you again real soon. See you later, folks. The .NET Core Podcast is a production of RJJ Software Limited.